Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Gail Lewis podcast. I am your host, Gail Lewis, and it is my pleasure to be back with you this evening for part two with Dr. Joel Kuszai. Hi, Dr. Joel.
Hi, Gail. Thanks for having me back.
Great to have you back with part two. A resounding round of applause. If you missed part one, just to catch you up, Joel is a preeminent researcher. He's also a professor of English at Queensborough Community College, where he chairs his department. And as far as research goes, his research covers a lot of areas within race and disparity. And more specifically, what we talked about on part one was his research into the quote unquote modern Klan. And so I wanted to pick up from where we left off in the first part. We talked about exactly what it is, what the Klan was, how they came to be, and why. And then we specifically got into Queens, and more specifically into the Klan in Jamaica, Queens, which is where we start to right now with this episode. So, Joel, tell me a little bit about the Klan in Jamaica, Queens, and let's tie that into the NAACP and how that came to be here.
Absolutely. In 1927, there was a lot of action, as we spoke just moments ago, about the work the Klan was doing to infiltrate Queens political operations such as political clubs. And so in 1926 and 1927, as Klan organizers came from the South primarily, but also from Philadelphia, to organize a kind of an attack on Governor Smith's campaign for the presidency. In Jamaica, you had what it was much different than it is now, in that it was very, very rural, but for kind of village outcroppings like South Jamaica, Hillside, and then Springfield, and just different towns and villages. And the suburban feel of it, all of the many, many homes that were built, really, really took off in the teens and the 20s, with a lot of them being built in the 1920s. So you had a lot of families moving there from Brooklyn, from Manhattan, from out of town even. And so the Klan was very, very much already there, in the sense that you had a kind of ripe victims, if you will, were manipulated by the Klan's rhetoric to think that that would be an answer to their problems. They were one of the biggest units of the Klan, of the dozen that I found in the borough, was in Jamaica. And at that same time, you had a lot of problems with the building of those neighborhoods. They were built out all at once, really a major cash grab, where the homes were built, but the roads were not paved and their sewers were not installed. And people were then given these heavy assessments to cover the bills for that, which outraged them. When Brooklyn was built, the whole city paid for that infrastructure. South Queens, especially Fourth Ward, was sort of held to a different model. And people got very, very angry. So you had an outcropping of hundreds, if not thousands, of community organizations, civic associations, taxpayer associations, political clubs, both Republican, Democrat, Independent, Socialist, and even Communist. And then you had also like kind of religious and kind of the organizations, more like fraternal organizations. You had all of these things growing all at once. And a lot of them were fixated on their grievances. Initially,
so the grievances included having to pay yourself to be hooked up to city, or even to run the pipes for things
that's
like
right.
sewerage, etc. What were some of the other grievances outside of, that's a
Yeah,
huge
I think
one right there,
that's a huge one. I think some of those homes were built with racial covenants, private arrangements, covenants that were kind of racially motivated. And so eventually, I don't think that this was true initially. It's a kind of a subject of further research, like how I don't think it was sort of a hotbed of racism initially, but that kind of got baked in over time. as like, so for example, I was looking recently, Addisley Park was built by a couple of different developers, and one of them was the brother of a Klan leader who lived in Woodhaven, but was leader for a while of the Richmond Hill unit. And that neighborhood, of course, was
hang on.
the epicenter for.
Joel, I've lost your video. Did you turn off
Uh-oh.
your camera by accident? Maybe.
No, but
Maybe you just have a little less bandwidth. But continue. So Addisley Park was built by a Klansman's brother.
Addisley Park was built in part by the brother of a Klan leader. I can't say anything about the builder himself, but he was the brother of a Klansman, and that neighborhood was at the center of the overturning of racial-inspired covenants. And in any case, at that time, the 1920s, as those grievances were kind of building out, some of the grievances held by people in the African American community related to exclusions in real estate. Some neighborhoods were becoming. I'm trying to figure out how to turn this on. Wait, I did it.
There you go. I can see you again.
And in any case, one of the organizations that was created was the Southside Civic Association, Southside Property Owners Association, and that was developed just months before the Jamaica branch of the NAACP formed, and by many of the same people. They were looped into a broader coalition of community-based organizations that fought what became known as the sewer scandal, and led to major investigations. The borough president was indicted, and you had sort of a kind of a political upheaval that led to George Harvey being elected in 1928, and then again in 29, the first Republican in Queens. He had the backing of the clubs in South Jamaica, and he had the backing of the Klan-infested clubs in South Jamaica, Woodhaven, Flushing. He was a Flushing person, George Harvey.
So he had the backing of both the regular clubs and the Klan clubs.
Yeah, that's what's really unique about it, and
Wow.
something that I'm in the middle of and trying to ferret it out, which is the complexity of that, because you had a lot of that was sort of how I got interested in some of the figures that led me to the founding. I hadn't seen anything about the founding of the NAACP in that environment, but in tracking down a couple of these political leaders, these Republican leaders, who felt, I thought it was odd that they were silent in the newspapers, and it was just that they were organizing through organizations. I couldn't see that initially. The only outspoken, there were Black Republican leaders who I felt were sort of compromised because they supported the Klan's participation in the Memorial Day parade, which was very divisive. Many people did not walk because of that inclusion, but like some of the organizations that were behind the African American participation in the parade said, yeah, it's fine with us. We don't like them, but they're allowed to march, and we're not going to back away just because they are. But I kind of wondered, like, where did that come from? And I started drilling down into people who were in the political environment of a lot of these African American Republican clubs that were all over South Queens, Flushing, Corona, Elmhurst, and of course, going up the river and into Brooklyn as well. Mm-hmm. And it was in that environment that the NAACP formed, and with explicit trying to render the Klan inert through lobbying and organizing. In 1946, the NAACP was central to ending their corporate charter in the state, but that's how long it took. It wasn't only in 46 that the state intervened and said no more. They had a legal charter to operate in the state until then.
So when did the NAACP Jamaica branch come to be in Southeast Queens?
In April of 1927, they had their first meetings. They had meetings about the idea, and many of them, and quite interestingly, some of the figures who were involved, like Frank Turner. Frank Turner was the bookkeeper for the Crisis, and he was the bookkeeper for the NAACP national organization, and had been since day one. As when he graduated from college, he went to work with W.B. Du Bois, and then they all came to New York, and he was part of that. It's interesting to look at the number those figures have become. Everybody talks about the 40s and the 50s with the great jazz leaders, right, and like the kind of the intensity with which the neighborhood like Adderley Park was sort of famous for being a destination. That started well before, and it's interesting to look at Harlem Renaissance figures figuring into that. Romeo Dougherty, he and his wife were fundamental in those organizations in South Jamaica, and he went on to become he was at the time a very famous sports journalist, and writing for like the Amsterdam News and other papers. He was a national figure, and it's just interesting to look at like door to door of those leaders from those community, like the woman who inspired all this for me is a woman named Anna Barnes. She was the founder of the South Jamaica Property Owners Association. She had a number of things that she did in Queens. She was the clerk for the Richmond Hill Republican Club under Warren Ashmead at a time when that was probably unheard of. I did not know the clubs were so segregated, but she was a groundbreaker. And like the New York Age newspaper pointed out that she was the first to work in a county organization as a clerk, as a pretty high up figure in the county Republican organization. But it's just interesting to see because she was considered like the leader of the Black Republican women, and I didn't know that looking into her would lead me anywhere, and I learned a lot about her and kind of where she came from, and then that just led me back to the NAACP, and suddenly I'm reading archival letters from the Jamaica 38 leader to the
and
NAACP.
That was the Klan. Jamaica 38 was the Klan, just for people.
He's trying to convince them that they weren't so bad and that they were not having any of it. Back in 1927, he was trying to curry favor with them. They were already aligned and supporting, or would be soon, in supporting Harvey. But that's a contradiction, I think, I'm still thinking about.
So the NAACP was established simultaneously. Adderley Park in Queens, Southeast Queens, is becoming Black Hollywood, if you will. A place of jazz. If you've made it as a Black person at that point, you were trying to buy a house in Adderley Park to be amongst, all the others. Lena Horne, she came later, but et cetera, et cetera. So the backlash, if I could call the NAACP's founding in Jamaica, well, the Jamaica branch, as kind of like a backlash or a response to the entrenchment of the Klan. Once they got going with the Jamaica NAACP, did that change anything as far as the foothold that the Klan had in Queens and specifically in Jamaica?
Yeah, I think it certainly must have. And they were very, very, it's very inspiring to look through their archival materials, because if you wanted to study an organization that got things done, that's the one that I would point to. There, obviously, it took many, many years, but like the tenacity with which they went after anti-lynching legislation or like housing opportunities and equality and employment, and so I think it was really like an interesting sort of part of Jamaica history that you had these luminaries living there who then saw fit to organize themselves in their own backyard. At the end of the 20s, and then they becoming more stronger in the 30s, and I think they were, so they were constantly making change and sort of highlighting problems. I did not know some of the events that took place, but through reading through their archives, because they were not in the papers. For example, individual families being terrorized, trying to get them to move out, and things like that. When there would be a new Black family on a block, there might be trouble, and it wasn't always Klan related, but it was certainly fostered by them having been in that environment. Of course, they were a constant nagging presence. And I saw evidence that they lived in South Jamaica well into the 1960s. But I did think they had a huge, so for example, one of the earliest cases they took in the fall of 1927 involved a sort of Jim Crow seating at one of the theaters on Jamaica Avenue, where a young man bought tickets with him and his friends, and then were directed to sit in the balcony. And their tickets said nothing of the sort, and they were protested that and then arrested. And
Wow.
Because that branch was immediately in the process of forming, there was a lot of like sort of outreach. So there was possible to get in touch and get legal support for fighting that case. And there's just other things like that that took place. And over the years, I think I was very interested in Rochdale, the building of Rochdale, and
Oh,
how in the summer
that's
of
a whole other
1963,
episode of the
yeah,
podcast. Yeah,
but I
let's
think
do it.
that's part of that legacy, that
Yeah, it really
they
is.
built that infrastructure that then got things done and continues to, as far as I can
Yeah.
see, looking at reading the papers and looking at their website stuff.
So Joel, let's definitely talk about Rochdale on the next episode, and some other clan related things. I'm very interested in Rochdale. I think that's just such a great, neighborhood to look into, how it was built, the backlash against it, the protests, et cetera, et cetera. That's another great one. So I'm going to have you back for a part
Anytime, yeah.
3 of the podcast, where we talk about that as well. But thanks so much, Joel, for joining us on the Gail Lewis podcast. If you'd like some more information about Joel, you can find him on Substack at ANONSTUNIVA. Saint, say that for me. Anon Saint.
Anon Saint Univa. It's a
There you
made-up
go.
word. So.
There you go. But it sounds good. There you go. Find him on Substack there. And thanks again, Joel, for joining me for part 1 and part 2 of the Gail
Thank you, Gail.
Lewis podcast. Everyone, you can always find me on YouTube at the Com Depot. You can find me here on the Gail Lewis podcast, and of course at Gail Lewis, Gail-Lewis.com. Thanks again, Joel, for joining me. Thanks everyone for watching, and for everyone here at the Gail Lewis podcast. Be well, be swell, and that's someone else. And have a good night, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Bye, everyone. Thank you.